Welcome to the Podcast Lab, your go-to space for raw conversations, curious questions, and inspiring stories from around the world. Whether you're here to learn, laugh, or just listen in, this is where ideas take shape and voices come alive. Ready to dive into fresh perspectives and thought-provoking discussions? Let's get started. This is the Podcast Lab. Subscribe now and never miss an episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at saying no, setting boundaries.
Interesting topic.
Yeah, and we've got some really interesting excerpts from this podcast script called The Power of Saying No, Setting Boundaries for Personal Growth. Have you noticed that? Like, how often do you hear the power of yes?
Yeah, say yes to everything.
Right, like saying yes is the key to success and happiness. But I don't know, I think we might have that wrong.
Interesting.
What do you think? I mean, do you ever feel like you're just juggling so many things all the time and maybe not taking care of yourself in the process?
Right. I think you raise a good point because I think so much of our society is set up to reward those people who are agreeable, right? And always willing to go the extra mile, never say no. And what I think is so interesting about this script that we're looking at is that it really highlights that saying yes can actually be detrimental.
Yes.
And that instead of viewing no as a negative or as selfish, it's actually a way of honoring your own needs and making sure that you're able to show up fully for the commitments that you do choose.
I love that. So it's not about being like a no person, but it's about being strategic with your yeses.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes total sense. But then the question is, how do we actually get better at saying no? Because like, I don't know about you, but I feel guilty or I'm worried about the consequences.
Yeah. No, that's really common, and the script talks about this too. And this is where the concept of boundaries comes in, right? So think of boundaries as kind of these invisible lines that you draw to protect your time and energy and well-being. And the research even backs this up. People who set boundaries tend to experience less stress. They have better mental clarity, and they report higher levels of satisfaction in their life. It's almost like creating a space where you can really thrive.
That makes sense. So it's like recognizing that your time and energy are valuable resources and you get to decide how you want to invest them. So what are some of the practical ways we can start setting those boundaries and saying no more effectively?
Yeah. Well, one technique that the script touches on is what's called the broken record technique.
Oh, I like that.
So imagine somebody you know is persistently asking you to do something you really just don't have the bandwidth for. Instead of getting kind of flustered or trying to come up with elaborate excuses, you simply repeat the same polite but firm refusal, like a broken record.
Okay,
right?
I see.
Like, I appreciate you asking, but I'm really overloaded right now and I won't be able to take that on.
Oh, so it's about being calm and consistent.
Exactly.
Even if they push back, you just keep saying it.
Yep. And you're communicating that this is my boundary, I'm sticking to it.
Okay, that's good. I like that. But let's talk about, some of those trickier situations, like when you have to say no at work or in close relationships. How do you navigate that without causing damage?
All right, those are tricky. It's about being really upfront and honest about your limitations.
Yeah.
But also emphasizing that your no is not a rejection of the person.
Right.
Right. But it's really about, again, protecting your own well-being.
Yeah.
So that you can show up as your best self in other areas of your life.
So for example, like let's say at work, instead of just saying no to a project, maybe you could offer an alternative solution.
Exactly.
Or suggest someone else who might be a better fit.
Exactly. Right. That way, you're still being helpful and collaborative.
Right.
While also honoring your own boundaries.
Right.
When it comes to close relationships, sometimes it's helpful to just have really open and honest conversations about your needs and your limitations and framing things in a positive way. So instead of just saying like, I can't do that, you could say, I really want to spend quality time with you on Saturday.
Right.
So I need to say no to this other commitment to make sure I have the energy for us.
Yeah, I love that because it's like it takes the focus off the no and it really puts it on like the positive intention behind it. It's like this no is actually serving a bigger yes in my life. But what about when people don't react well?
Right.
Because not everyone is going to be happy when we start setting boundaries. What about those people who are used to us always saying yes? And then maybe they try to guilt trip us or make us feel bad.
Yeah, it can be hard. You're right. There might be some resistance from people, especially people who are used to us being overly accommodating.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that you have a right to set boundaries. And you don't need to justify them to anyone. But you can try to communicate your no in a way that acknowledges their feelings and emphasizes that it's not personal. So you could say something like, I know you're disappointed and I wish I could help, but I've really had to prioritize my own well-being lately.
That's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not a one-time conversation. Sometimes it's like an ongoing thing.
Right.
And you might need to have some difficult conversations with people who are repeatedly pushing those boundaries.
Yes, definitely. And, the script actually dives into some really relatable stories about how this plays out in real life. Like, there's one example about this overworked professional who just constantly felt drained because she was saying yes to every extra project that came her way. But then she finally learned to say no.
Oh, wow.
And she ended up seeing a boost in both her work quality and her overall happiness. It's almost like by saying no, she gave herself permission to actually focus on what mattered most.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that created better results, and she was more fulfilled too.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? Sometimes less is more.
Totally. And there was another story in here about a parent, right, who's just so time crunched.
Yes, the time-crunched parent.
And they're constantly saying yes to, like, school events, volunteer commitments, social gatherings.
All of it.
And then they have no time left for family.
Yeah, it's such a classic example of how we think we're doing the right thing. We're saying yes to all these things.
Right.
But actually, we're spreading ourselves way too thin.
Right.
And then it harms the very things that we're trying to prioritize.
Exactly.
So in this case, this parent learned to set boundaries, started saying no to some of those outside demands, and then was able to create more space for those meaningful connections with their children.
Like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
You have to take care of yourself.
You can't give what you don't have.
Exactly. And speaking of, taking care of ourselves and making choices that support our well-being, the script also talks about values, right?
Yeah.
And how important it is to be mindful of our values when we're deciding when to say yes and when to say no.
Absolutely. When we're clear about our values, it makes it so much easier to figure out which commitments align with those values.
Right.
And which ones don't. So, for example, if you value family time above all else, you might be more likely to say no to that late work event.
Right.
Because you'd rather have dinner with your kids.
Exactly. Or if if creativity is something that's important to you, you're going to be more likely to say no to something that's going to take away from your painting time or whatever it is.
Right, exactly.
So it's almost like values become this filter, right?
Yes.
For our decisions. If something aligns with our values, it's a yes. If it doesn't, then it's a no, or at least a not right now.
I love that, yeah.
Okay, so that's helpful. So we've got our broken record technique. We've got thinking about our values. But what about just like the actual delivery of the no? Because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. I don't want to create conflict.
Right.
What are some tips for saying no in a way that minimizes those negative impacts?
So I think it's a combination of being assertive, but also kind and compassionate.
Okay.
The script talks about being direct and clear.
Yeah.
But I also think it can be really helpful to frame your no in a way that acknowledges the other person's perspective. So you could say something like, I understand this is important to you, and I wish I could say yes, but.
Oh, I like that.
Right?
Because you're not making excuses, but you're acknowledging their feelings.
Exactly. And sometimes it can be helpful to offer an alternative as well.
Right.
Let's say somebody asks you to spearhead a huge project at work, but, you're already drowning. You could maybe suggest someone else.
Right.
Who you think would be a good fit or offer to contribute in a smaller capacity.
Right.
So you're still showing that you want to be supportive. You want to be helpful, but you can't fully commit.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so those are good. What about when people push back? Because sometimes even when we say no in the nicest way possible, they're not happy about it.
Yeah, and it can be frustrating. And, in those situations, it's really important to just remember that you have a right to protect your time and energy. And you don't owe anyone an explanation or justification.
Right.
So if somebody's being really persistent or trying to manipulate you, you can always just fall back on that broken record technique.
Oh, okay, right.
Just politely and firmly repeat your no.
Yeah.
And don't get drawn into an argument or justification.
It's like that saying, no is a complete sentence.
Exactly.
But then there are those times, I guess, where maybe it does require more of a conversation, with someone who's repeatedly crossing those boundaries.
Absolutely. And those conversations can be tough.
Yeah.
But they're often really necessary.
Mm-hmm.
for establishing those healthy and respectful relationships. So if there's someone in your life who's not respecting your boundaries, it's important to address it directly.
Okay.
And, choose a time and place where you can talk calmly and openly.
Right.
Explain how their actions are impacting you. And really focus on your own feelings and needs, using I statements like, I feel overwhelmed when you, or, I need you to respect my decision when I say no to.
Okay, so really clearly communicate your needs and expectations.
True.
It's about advocating for yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes a little bit of courage to do that, but you're right, it's often necessary for those healthy relationships. You know what I'm finding really interesting about this conversation? Is that it's not just about individual empowerment. I'm starting to see how this idea of saying no could have some bigger societal implications.
That's a really great point.
Oh.
Because you're right, the pressure to say yes, I think it's amplified for certain groups of people, right? Women, people of color, anyone from marginalized communities may feel more obligated to constantly please others or to prove their worth.
Yeah, it's there's this, I don't know, this unspoken expectation to be agreeable and accommodating all the time. And it can really lead to feeling overwhelmed, feeling undervalued, even feeling exploited in some cases.
Absolutely. So for those individuals, learning to say no can be such a powerful act of self-preservation, and even resistance. It's like reclaiming their own agency and pushing back against those systemic pressures that are trying to tell them that they're not worth it.
Right, exactly. And I think on a broader level, we really need to rethink our glorification of busyness, how we always equate saying yes with success.
Yes.
Maybe it's time for a new definition of success.
Absolutely. It's about shifting our values from this constant striving and achievement to one that values well-being and balance and authenticity. What if we lived in a world where people felt empowered to say no without fear of judgment or reprisal?
Yeah. I mean, that would be amazing, but it feels like it would require a pretty big shift, a collective effort.
It does. It takes all of us. It's not just about individuals changing their own behavior.
Right.
It's also about creating a cultural shift where saying no is seen as healthy. It's necessary for living a good life.
So we need to support each other.
Yes.
In setting boundaries. Respect those boundaries and challenge those who try to, undermine them.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of respect and understanding.
This has been so interesting. I already feel more equipped to, set some boundaries and say no in a way that feels good.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that the power of no is not just about declining those requests. It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's about taking back your agency and shaping a life that reflects what you truly value.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is just say no.
Exactly. And in doing so, we open ourselves up to a more meaningful yes.
Yes.
Right? For ourselves and for the world around us. So this has been a really fun, deep dive.
It has. It really has. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. What I'm finding really fascinating is how this script, while it's focused on personal growth, it hints at some really interesting societal implications, right?
Yeah. It does. It really does. And the script mainly focuses on that personal growth aspect of saying no. Yeah. But it does raise this really interesting question. What if we took this concept of saying no and applied it not just to, personal requests, but to larger systems, structures that maybe aren't serving us or even causing harm?
Oh, that's a really interesting thought. I like that. So it's saying no could actually be a form of activism, a way to really stand up for what you believe in and demand change.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it, every social movement, every fight for justice, it starts with people saying no to the status quo.
Right.
It's saying no to injustice, to inequality, to anything that really diminishes human dignity and well-being.
Oh, that's powerful. And it makes me think about the environmental movement too, right?
Yeah.
Where people are saying no to unsustainable practices, to excessive consumption, to these policies that are actively harming the planet. It's about drawing a line and saying, enough is enough. We deserve better than this.
Yes. Exactly. And that collective no can be so powerful, right? It can create this ripple effect.
Yeah.
Inspire others to take a stand and demand change. So it's really recognizing that our individual choices, those individual no's, they actually do contribute to that larger movement for positive change.
It's we're not just setting boundaries in our personal lives, but we're setting boundaries for society as a whole.
Yeah.
Boundaries that protect our values, our communities, our planet.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we have a voice.
Yeah.
And we have a right to use that voice to shape a better future. And sometimes the most powerful way to do that is to simply say no.
It's so simple, but so powerful. This whole conversation has just been so eye-opening for me. And I feel like, we've talked about so many different ways that saying no can really empower us, not just in our personal lives, but on a larger scale.
I'm so glad. It's been a real pleasure exploring this with you. And, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I just want to leave our listeners with this one question. What are you ready to say no to? And what will that no free you up to say yes to?
That's such a great question. Really something to think about, right? Because sometimes what we choose not to do is just as important as what we choose to do. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.